So first, we're going to be hearing from Delphine about environmental drivers of research evidence and prevention. Delphine.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everyone. And this talk will be given together with Sinaia Netanyahu from the WHO. So I'm Delphine Destoumieux. I work for the CNRS in France. And the data we'll be presenting this afternoon are relative to the environmental drivers of pandemics. So the COVID and the pandemic topics integrates into the research goal 1 of HERA. This research goal, as Robert showed you this morning, is relative to holistic approaches. We are at this level of integration. And more specifically, we have integrated this topic into health and biodiversity loss, into biological agents, environment, and human health, and into food, ecosystem services, and farming. We also have 3 specific research goals we'll be talking about in this talk. So here we are talking about research needs, and the research needs we have identified require the clarification of the causal relationship that exists between environmental change, human activities, and the evolution and spread of pathogens. And the reason for that is that we need to prevent future emerging infectious diseases. So we have described research needs in a number of disciplines, but most of all, we believe that we need integration of these disciplines into interdisciplinary research. And we have formed a group within the HERA consortium, and we invited specialists of ecological sciences, environmental sciences, social sciences, and evolutionary sciences, because we were thinking that these disciplines need to have more input into the prevention of infectious diseases, and they are absolutely required for that. So, as we talked about COVID, we talk about a virus that comes from the wild animals and has infected humans, right? So this is called a zoonotic disease. At least at the beginning, it was really a zoonotic disease. Now it's a disease that transfers from person to person, but initially it comes from the wild. And actually, human infections naturally transfer from animals to humans. Most of our infectious diseases, 2/3 of them, come from animals, right? So this is naturally occurring in nature, and this is the reason why we believe we need to do a lot of efforts, research efforts, to characterize what viruses, what pathogens circulate in the wild, meaning in animal reservoirs, but also in the water, in the soil, and in the air. And this is important because repeated contacts with those pathogens are required for zoonotic disease to occur, okay? What is also required very often is a change in the genome of these pathogens. That is what we call the evolution of the pathogens. And about this subject, we identify human activities and environmental change as major driver of disease emergence, because they can create the conditions of pathogen evolution. They can also create new contacts between human and animals that will allow the transfer of the pathogens to our species. So these drivers, we know them for most of them. Deforestation, which destroys the habitats of the animals, and then they come to cities, for example. We also have climate change, and we also have pollution. They act on the acceleration of the evolution of the pathogen. They act on the distribution of pathogens at a geographic range. And this creates new contacts, as I was saying. They also act on the immunity. They can cause immune suppression of the host defenses, particularly our defenses. We also need research on the transmission. We've seen with COVID that there is an extremely rapid condition now for transmission of the pathogens. And we know, of course, there is a lot of it is due to, sorry, I don't know how to manage this thing. Okay, maybe I don't do that. Yeah, it's due to transportation. And this also includes the food system and the animal and plants that we carry abroad, right? It's not only persons. It also refers to the intensive agriculture and farming. We've seen conditions where pathogens can expand very rapidly in farms, and this creates new contacts with the farmers, for example, and it can favor the transmission. And then there is also a need to understand how pathogens are transmitted. Is it direct contact or is it indirect contact through vectors, for example? And we need to know how this occurs. Is it in the water? Is it in the air? Is it in the soil? Okay, so all this is relevant to the One Health, eco-health, and planetary health concepts that we've been talking about this morning. And what is important to understand is that the health crisis is very much interlinked with other crises like antimicrobial resistance, climate change, and biodiversity loss. So we need to adopt a holistic approach to characterize what's going on here and to prevent future pandemics from happening, at least lower the rate of emergencies. Okay. This is relevant to the strategies of the EU, with the Green Deal in particular, biodiversity strategy, Farm to Fork, Zero Pollution Action Plan. It's also in line with the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals and the One Health Action Plan against antimicrobial resistance. Regarding the future, we believe that somehow COVID-19 can be considered a case study for preventing future emerging diseases from developing into pandemics. Indeed, there is 1.7 million viruses that belong to 25 high-risk viral families that are yet to be discovered. So this has the potential for creating new diseases. And they circulate in mammals and in birds in the wild, so we need to know about this. And among them, it is estimated that 700,000 have a zoonotic potential, okay? Beyond that, we know that our behaviors and the environmental change creates the conditions of disease emergence. We have more contacts with animals and we accelerate the evolution of the pathogens. And these drivers relate to agricultural land conversion and developmental activities. They relate to ecosystem degradation, wildlife trade, intensive farming, changes in climate patterns, and international travel, trade, and commerce. So with that, we focused on 3 research goals that are specific to COVID-19. The first one is human and environmental drivers of SARS-CoV-2 emergence and spread. Second is health impact of COVID-19 and environmental stressors. And the third one is integrated socio-economic, political, health implications and COVID-19 in intervention strategies. So about the first objective, SARS-CoV-2 emergence and spread, we focused on 3 research needs. The first one is viral ecology and spillover. Second is spread of the virus. And last is the emergence and evolution of the virus. Again, as I said, we need to know where, when, and why SARS-CoV-2 circulates in the environment. This includes the wild and the domestic fauna. It also incorporates the idea of human contacts with the wild fauna and the domestic fauna. We also need to know how human activities and environmental change accelerate the virus evolution, meaning its genome, right, and facilitate its transmission. Regarding spread, we need to assess the impact of climate and seasonality on the transmission, the role of the different media, aerosols and air particles, the behavior and virulence of the virus in water, soil and waste, and we need to build robust models of the virus spread and severity. And finally, we need evolutionary sciences, to date the emergencies, to trace the routes of transmission. This is very important. If we have information on the genomes, we can do that, okay? And it's also very important to be able to do modeling of the evolution of the virus, because we are now all immunized because we've been vaccinated or we have had the COVID. And there's a strong pressure on the evolution of the virus, so we need models for that. Finally, we need to estimate the fitness of the variants. They are not equal. You see that some are very efficient and spread everywhere. Others are not. So we need to understand what is underneath this process. And we need that to take action, of course. We can adapt land use, food systems, agriculture, etc. We need that to protect vulnerable populations. We are not equal regarding COVID, like we're not equal regarding any infectious diseases. We need that for mitigating viral transmission, for preventing a possible evolution of the virus toward better transmitted or more virulent variants. And we need that to adopt control measures and evaluate or validate their effectiveness. Finally, we've been thinking on instruments. We were talking about infrastructures for anticipating future emergencies and implementing solutions within territories. So the first instrument we propose are ecological health observatories. They should be implanted in hotspots of biodiversity because this is where infectious diseases emerge, okay? And these observatories would provide robust data for research. They would assist the development and transfer of pathogen monitoring methods. And they would share data, it has to be open data, of course, and co-build the projects locally. We also propose to implement living labs that involve local actors and aim at changes in agricultural practices and environmental management. And that would be my last slide. I just want to recall that the HERA Consortium has made proposal for multidisciplinary research to achieve the transformational change, and this is in the article from Robert. And with that, I will leave the microphone to you, Sinaia.
Oh, thanks, Delphine. So let's see. Okay. Yeah, I'm working with Apple. It's a bit different. Okay. Yeah, I can see it there. So I guess while Delphine was covering the emergence and also the spread, to cover the first research goal on human and environmental drivers of the COVID emergence and spread, I will continue talking about the health impact of COVID-19 and the environmental stressors, and also how we should integrate the socioeconomic and political and the health implications. Let's see, I'm going forward this way. Right. Okay. So the first thing that was raised is understanding the population burden and identifying population at risk. So the first item was conducting large and harmonized population and patient cohorts in the EU, specifically to be able to evaluate the effects of the environment on COVID-19, such as air pollution, lifestyle, specifically smoking and diet and physical activities, and also to look into indoor pollution, green and blue spaces, noises, etc. Also to identify susceptible groups, and also to examine the interaction between the pandemics and health effects related to environmental exposure. Then harmonizing studies to ensure comparability between various contexts. This is also very important. And assessing zero prevalence and host genetics to study the impact of environmental exposures in modeling immune responses during the pandemic. And finally, studying the impact of delay in routine vaccination and other measures like cancer screening programs and diagnosis and therapy for other diseases. Okay, more specifically, when it comes to looking into the environmental stressors that affect COVID-19 spread and severity, it was suggested to look at issues related to climate change and heat waves and health systems, also to climate change and the impact of control measures during the heat waves itself, also on spatial and temporal variation of temperature, humidity, UV radiation. When it comes to air pollution, to look into the link between highly polluted areas and virus spread and also the impact, synergistic health impact of air pollution and severity of the COVID, and impact of air pollutants on infections outcome. Other examples can be in relation to toxicants, impact of exogenous toxicants on the outcome of the viral infections. Next, it's suggested also to look into an integrated modeling and assessment, and also how to coordinate capacities. This goes really beyond the environmental implication. It's to integrate the health and the social impact modeling and assessments of COVID, to look into related intervention strategies, confinement, improved environmental conditions like air quality, economic crisis, social and health implications, environmental and health inequalities, inequalities also in relation to access to green space, parks, etc. This inequalities is a topic that came very vividly during this COVID in relation also to environmental amenities. And also how to coordinate the health and environmental impact prediction capacities across the European region or the EU to enable and support effectively public intervention and enhance preparedness, and also to look into medium and long-term studies of on sustainable infrastructures and network. Next, looking into how to the social and economic and psychological impact of COVID-19. So it's again to conduct large and harmonized population and patient cohort in the EU, specifically to look into access. To assess the association of COVID-19 countermeasures and consequences on anxiety, on mental health, which also was proven a very important subject. On social interaction and quality of life. Also consider cultural differences among countries and societies, and to see how it affects social and health inequalities, and identify strategies to mitigate these effects and build resiliency. Economic and ethical aspects obviously should be integrated in the research as well. Next, we wanted to look into interaction between COVID-19 and the built environment, study on how the COVID-19 pandemic will reshape the urban built environment and how the built environment influences the occurrence and severity of the disease. And this is yet to be seen. It's really, really interesting. So what will be the role of cities? It was mentioned this morning. What will be, the structure that, how is going to, the cities as structures will affect transmission and impact of diseases. The transport mode, which was also a major issue during COVID. What would be the person-to-person distance? There were lots of questions at the beginning. Even WHO at the beginning was asking those questions, and it was not something, an automatic reply to the pandemic or response that was pulled out of the shelf, and it had to be investigated. Especially also, do we need indoor, outdoor, the mask, when we should wear them at all that was something to be explored and discussed. Also, how do we redesign public space and enable safe outdoor and outdoor physical and social activities? But when we mention that, it's also important to see how we can create co-benefits, because if we already redesign the structure of cities to enable to deal better with future pandemics, perhaps we can also think about co-benefits related to climate change. If we think about green space again as an example, so there are lots of co-benefits that can help us in mitigating climate change that should be also integrated in mainstream as win-win solutions. Also looking into vulnerable people such as elderly, maternal and children in the cities, how that would affect them in the future. Then the work environment is also a very much of an interest. Study the short-term risk of infection diseases and also stress and burnout, to develop evidence-based prevention protocol to assess and evaluate long-term effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the post-pandemic period on new economic setting, including types of employment, working patterns, and unemployment, as I heard recently, not everybody is very, very happy to come back to the offices. You know, we were thinking, well, the office is about one big family. Well, not necessarily so. Some people may not return to the office, so this is something also to be looked at. Finally, I think that the implementation is a very critical issue. I think that the research of how to integrate the social, economic, and political issues of, you know, and the environment and COVID are very, very important, and we should take advantage of the data that has been collected in the last 2 years, etc. But then we need to take the extra mile of what does it mean? What are those results implying in terms of implementation in strategies and policies for future optimal intervention. So this is also should not be, I mean, we should not just have the science and live it. We should also investigate how it's going to be implemented in the future. So I will stop here mentioning that this lecture was based on 2 HERA papers and there are lots of other resources. Thanks.
First, are there any relatively short questions? Well, I have one, so. Which may, no, hopefully it'll be short. Thinking about COVID-19 as the example, or SARS-CoV-2, how could we have prevented the rapid transmission all around the world of it? I mean, frankly, it was a miracle that we had vaccines available in less than a year. I don't know if that will always happen, okay? So what could have been done early on? I mean, is there anything we could have done early on to prevent the spread? We know once we had vaccinations, if we could have made them mandatory, things might have happened a little differently. Maybe we never would have evolved some of the mutations. But if we get a highly transmissible infectious agent, how can we prevent it from going around the world literally overnight? Any ideas? That's a little question.
Well, obviously we haven't done that. Well, there are actions. We learn from this experience anyway, right? And we know what causes rapid transmission. In the case of this kind of pulmonary disease transmitted through air, right? But we didn't know at the beginning really how it was transmitted. So there are a few things that we know, as I was saying, you know, like international travel, commerce, and this favor the rapid spread of pathogens, obviously. Intensive farming is also another one, you know, because it was coming from animals, and rapidly it went from human to animals. It's also a reverse zoonotic disease, right? But the problem is that usually when a disease emerges, you don't know much about it. So we could have learned a lot about the first SARS emergence, and indeed in Asian countries, at the very beginning of the disease, they limited the spread. They knew how to do, right? But we didn't do that in France. You didn't do that in the USA, etc., right? We were looking at these people wearing masks, and we were thinking, should we wear masks? And there was discussions about it, right? Remember that. So, so really, at the beginning, we don't know, but some countries knew how to do, and they did a very good job. Think about South Korea. Very good job at controlling the disease at the beginning, right? So we need to learn from that. We need to be prepared, but we also need, in the long term, to change the way we behave. And if we want to travel so much, if we want to continue with intensive farming, if we want to, you know, networking, etc., then we won't limit the spread of any kind of disease. This is my personal interpretation. Yeah.
I just wish to add to that the HERA, the Health International Regulations that was formed in 2005, because you were not asking how about how to. I mean, it was already emerged, right? So you're asking about the transmission. So the HERA was assigned by countries around the world. It's a WHO framework to really deal with pandemics. And this is really interesting because countries around the world are also signatory to the HERA, these health international regulations. And in the HERA, after 2005, it was all spelled out. I mean, what countries need to do in order to prepare themselves to deal with pandemic. And so, in fact, we had to open those books. It's all there. But one important element is that in the HERA, it says that countries should all continuously practice and continuously train themselves and continuously be prepared to hold on to that. But unfortunately, the day-to-day lives, I mean, there's issues related to pandemic. It sounds like climate change. It may be happening somewhere there in the future, not to us, somewhere else. And this is a bit neglected. So hopefully now everybody understands that we do need to prepare ourselves for pandemics.
So I'll take one more question now, and then we'll go on to the next talk. And any questions that we have coming in? Nothing on the web yet? Okay.
Thanks. So one quick question about intensive farming, because my understanding is most pandemic viruses go through several species before they evolve in a way they can infect humans. SARS-CoV-2 didn't go straight from bats to humans. It went through something else like pangolins. And 25 years ago, Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs and Steel, wrote that most pandemics will continue to come out of China because it's the only country in the world where humans, pigs, ducks and chickens live very closely together. And it seems to me that it's not intensive farming itself, it's intensive farming with certain combinations of species. And so should we be trying to reorganise farming at the same time as reorganising cities?
Yeah, this is very true for the bird flu, right, for example. So, yeah, indeed, the farming, the combination of certain species may favor host shifts from birds to human, for example, as you were mentioning. And this is another area of work, I don't know how to say that, but we need to remodel a few things with this knowledge in mind, yeah. And this is just traditional farming. We do that in France too. I'm sure you do that in your own country, so yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll bring you back later. I just have to say that, of course, in the United States, we have what we call politely intensive livestock agriculture, which means we might have 50,000 chickens in a single facility. I mean,